in supporting our FFA program and working collaboratively on this. So this is whereupon I will accept the district award. It's not just one person, not just guys. This is our system. No, that's great to see the district get that recognition. Don't be too humble. You deserve that. Thank you. Next up is the consent agenda.
I was also going to say congratulations to Tim and to our team. Tonight, December 5th, 2016 regular minutes. The check register and concurrent transaction as presented. I also like to say sincere thank you to the following individuals and groups and of their donations to the district. $1,650 from Sand Hill Working for Kids for water fountain conversions at Sand Hill. $1,000 from Stoke High School Band Boosters for the high school 2016 field show production music. $1,000 from Stoke Viking Wrestling Club for exercise equipment and SHS Fitness Center. $210 from Veganza Working for Kids for Veganza Student All-State Player Registration Fees. $37.78 from the Kula Foundation, Red Robin, for Stoke High School students in need, and related budget adjustments for $3,897.78. There are no professional educator resignations at this time, and also no contracts to approve at this time. I also finally move approval of a field trip request for the 7th grade River Bluff students to travel to Trees for Tomorrow in Eagle River, Wisconsin on February 27th to March 1st, 2017, which is the purple block, and March 1st through 3rd, 2017 for the gold block.
The consent agenda has been moved. Is there a second to that motion? Paul? Is there any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, consent agenda passes. Committee reports. Policy was very busy. Donna, I'll let you start with that.
Thanks. The first policy that we are going to be discussing is number 206, purchasing. You'll notice that there's something in common with all of the policies they bring forth, and that is they're all the 200 series that Erica Pickett, our business services director, is in charge of shepherding through, and it's just part of an annual review. So with 2006 in purchasing, this had not been reviewed since 2008, and even at that time, apparently few revisions were made. So Erica took this time to do a pretty comprehensive review of this policy and worked with someone from Boardman Clark. So this policy has really been cleaned up a lot for consistency. And one of the biggest things that they worked with is the distinction between bidding and proposals. Some of the law has changed since that time, where districts are no longer required to do lowest bid. And so if you do bids, you have to take the lowest. If you do a proposal, it's not required. And there is some flexibility then. Erica gave the example of bus leases. You don't always take the lowest proposal because perhaps we've learned that that bus may be cheaper, but you can only get parts from that company and they're very expensive. So that was just what they needed to do in terms of cleaning it up. And what you had a copy of both the marked up copy as well as the new proposed one. They also kind of moved some things out in guidelines and things that align more to the current practice, which is actually what they've been doing in the past several years. So does anyone have any questions on this policy or comments?
it looks pretty solid, so.
Yeah, it was important for the policy committee to make sure that we ran this one at least through finance, because you, lots of times make a recommendation of purchasing to the board.
The one thing I wondered was, in 206, you introduced the concept of business agent in there,
Mhm.
combining the director of business service and or the district administrator. And I wondered if that carried through with some of the rest of the 200 policies, or if that only wanted to exist in this 206 policy.
That's a good question. And not seeing Erica here, to answer that, I can get back and find that out and make sure that we have the answer, at the next meeting where this is discussed.
Right.
If there's any,
I think, but I think Erica will answer the question. But I think the business agent is something that's in the statute for bids, et cetera. So I think that's why it's being referred to as the business agent, because we're mirroring what we have to do in the statute. But we'll ask Erica. Erica right now is attending.
sure. Great, anything else? Moving right along, we have, 2007, the student activity funds. And, again, this was just reviewed as part of that whole, rotation. There were just some minimal revisions. What's more significant about, this review is that the, really comprehensive guidelines were developed that really did not exist, or they were kind of all over the place. Erica worked really closely with administration at the high school, and the guidelines that they created actually mirror current practice. I say that only just reminding you that we aren't approving the guidelines. They're just here for, our, information, but you can see what was changed in the policy. Now, any questions on that?
207 was really clean, I didn't even have any markups.
We are the new and improved policy committee. Anything else? So that will come back, at our next meeting. Next up is, 2008, student sales of merchandise and advertising. And, again, this was, last reviewed, in 2007. And the policy had minimal revisions, but new guidelines have been developed, working closely with the high school and some of the administrators at the other schools to clarify cash handling procedures. And this is more at the staff level. So one thing that came up while the policy committee was discussing this is the difference between the, some of these, guidelines in terms of internal organizations versus external organizations. So this policy does not apply to external organizations. For instance, Working for Kids or the booster clubs. That is not something that we really have any authority over, but the things that happen inside, if there's sales, things that happen on school grounds, I think is where it comes down to. And then but we realized while we were discussing that there needs to be a better communication piece between some of these external groups that do collect money or raise money that are used for things within the school district. That they may be needing to have some tighter controls, and we need to know, there's just questions about if they earmark it for specific items, that we have to actually follow through with that, whether or not we want to or not, and how that money is, how they go through the earmarking process, I guess.
Give us an example of that, specifically what you're saying.
Well, like we might get a donation to be specifically for the track, and we can only use it for the track. Whether we want to do that or not. But do you mean like internal cash handling things
Oh,
or
no,
external?
Yeah, I believe what you were saying is about the external,
Mhm.
Organizations that do internal,
Right,
fundraising.
the lines get a little blurry there, and I think that's where we need to we have to do some more discussion, but that's not something that would be policy related. So boosters, sports boosters, for instance, will raise money for something, and
Or a
then
Working for Kids organization having a fundraiser, involving our students.
Right,
Technically, it's their fundraiser. Technically, all the money is handled by the Working for Kids group. So our internal controls, do not apply. But it gets a little muddy because they're using our kids, for the fundraiser type of thing. So, but it's an outside organization, and there's some groups like Working for Kids, the booster groups in particular, that are very closely related to us. They're us, but they're not us, if that makes sense.
but the reason for the big, I think what Erica wanted to get across was that the reason for the guidelines being, extensively reworked is for the things that happen internally, and especially with cash handling. So with that, does anyone have any other questions or comments?
I did have one point of clarity, I thought, in there, in 20810, line C,
Mhm.
as that gives a minimum limit
Oh, yeah.
for the chaperoning, I guess. Is there a maximum limit, or?
Well, that's interesting. We actually asked about that, and those ages are identified in statute. So that's why they're there. Is that what you're talking about?
Yep.
Yeah.
I wondered if there's, if you've got like, is it just one person per 20 students, or do you need an additional person if you have over 50?
Yeah, I think the only reason we have anything specified in that whole section is because it came directly from statute.
Okay.
So if there is no if it isn't
Mhm.
stipulated, then we just left it out and left
Yep.
it vague. But we do reference all of the statutes that are pertinent. And then we did, just going back, we did make a clarification in the sentence right before 208.10, which we did say all funds generated through district fundraising or donated to the district received from external. I mean, that's where I was trying to get across the difference between the internal and external organization. So it looks like nothing more on that, okay? Then, the very exciting, policy 209, asset management and disposal, which, again, I believe was minimal changes. Sorry, I can get these issue papers up fast enough. The only change that we had to make to this was the striking the annual meeting requirement because it was, taken out of law. And so we just made sure we cleaned that up. So very simple. Any questions?
Of the line E,
Mhm.
it states about that the monies would go back into the general fund. Do we have to specify that as Fund 10, or is it okay to list it as just general fund?
That's a good question. Tim, do you know the answer to that?
What was that one again?
Do we have to it specifies it just as monies deposited in general fund? Do we have to specify the fund as in Fund 10, or?
No, I think we can just leave it as general fund. I think it can be that vague.
Okay.
I can ask Erica and make sure we have the answer for the next time it comes up. If there's no other question.
A question I had about that. So
Mhm.
when an item is not sold and it's completely fine, what happens to it? Is it that it's disposed, like, it's disposed somewhere, I forgot where I saw it, but anyway, it's not sold during any of the public, sales. Is it just disposed, or can it be,
Donated? I don't know the answer to that. Tim, do you perhaps know the answer?
What was that question again?
About if something that we have up for, to sell, and it doesn't sell, then what do we do with it?
That's where, if you notice in the policy, we've added, or we can destroy it. Sometimes it's a lot easier if we can recycle it, if we can, depending on what it is, whether it's old computers, whether it's things that we can recycle or we can just throw away. So that's why I think the two changes of this policy were, if it doesn't sell, and we'll try to sell it, we can destroy it, because sometimes storing it costs more than if we just get rid of it, and we're not gonna get much for it anyways. And the other change in this policy was, state law changed. It used to be that we had to ask permission at the annual meeting every year for our community to give us permission to dispose of property we didn't need. It's no longer part of statutes. So that was the two changes of this policy, of allowing us to, if it doesn't sell, dispose it, to get rid of it.
But if it's something that it doesn't represent a danger to whatever, private stuff like books or paper or anything, say it's furniture and it's completely fine, would the district donate it?
We've donated in the past. We've had a yard sale or kind of a garage sale type of thing. Several years ago, we did that. We'll donate it. We'll donate books. We're not just gonna destroy it. If we can find a home for it, that's what we'll try to do. So we've donated to different organizations. We've donated to different charities if we have to, etc.
Moving along then to 210, fraud prevention and reporting. This policy was up for review as part of the 200 series, and no changes needed to be made other than to update some of the cross-references.
I've got a question along those lines. We were just talking before about how these policies do not apply to external organizations that do fundraising and so forth. Do we have any way of suggesting to outside groups, booster groups, working for kids groups, that they adopt best accounting practices, for example, in how money is handled? Because although a sports booster group is not part of the district's organization, if something bad happened with a booster group, in the public's eye, I can imagine the district being associated with that.
We've recommended, and I don't remember the last time we recommended. It's been a couple of years when we can recommend, because we've recommended to all our groups, our Working for Kids groups, our booster groups, for example, that they have a policy in place, 2 signatures on a check,
Right.
kind of a check and balance type of thing. We've recommended whether they adopt those recommendations is totally up to the organization. But I remember a couple of years ago, especially the booster groups, there was a concerted effort to ask them to have that check and balance type of thing, just for exactly that. But it might be worth, sending out again, kind of here's some recommendations. Here's our internal checks and balances, just as a suggestion that you may want to adopt these, etc.
At the policy level, we actually discussed the possibility of registering with the district, and what that would
As
involve.
an external group.
Right,
Okay.
but it's just really difficult because you can't possibly think of all the groups that may want to, donate something or, be, attached somehow to the district. So, but it is something to,
I think we should look at that, because it's not hard to imagine. I mean, you look at university sports programs, for example. There's a scandal every year where some individual sport booster or something like that does something that reflects badly on the university.
It might be worth taking the time to produce a trifle of how you interact with the district, kind of some guidelines, kind of some suggested accounting guidelines type of thing, that we could have on hand that we could give out to any organization. I don't imagine we have to change very often. But yeah, it might be worth looking into creating something like that.
But you're not, I just wanna make sure, you're not suggesting that we should be, incorporating anything like that into this policy?
No,
Okay.
and I don't think we could. I mean, the only real enforcement mechanism is to say, adopt these policies or we're not going to accept money from you.
Right.
And I mean, we could do that, but I don't know that that's something that anybody really would like to see happen.
Mhm.
Well, also, if you decide you do wanna have these groups register, then you've sort of made it a more formal relationship.
Mhm.
So I think we'd have to take that into account when we have that discussion. Is that, do we wanna do that, or
But
would we
I-
rather just have them not
Right.
registered with the district?
But I think Donna makes a really good point. You know, you look at the consent agenda every meeting and, you know, there are individuals, there are companies, there are all sorts of people who, you know, and we're thankful for that generosity, who donate to the district, and to try to exert that kind of control over how they raise and handle money, that would be a nightmare.
Well, and people might be less interested if they have to jump through hoops or fill out a bunch of forms and things like that.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of people that might just go, I'll do
Yeah.
it next year.
I
Give
think,
it somewhere else.
I mean, I think we have to keep in the forefront that, I mean, what problem are we trying to solve? I mean,
Right.
is this becoming a problem for the board, and we're trying to come up with ways to deal with it? Maybe we have to wait until it happens, but I mean, I think there's lots of things that we can do, like Tim has suggested, and we can
Mhm.
keep reminding people, but yeah, we certainly don't want to, do anything that could possibly make a partnership or a potential partnership,
Right.
cause a problem there.
Right. I agree.
So this will come back then again at the next meeting.
I guess maybe if you at least made an assessment, maybe from the business office, just a risk-based assessment on, donations and that have come in. I mean, if the risk isn't there, then we're not worried about it.
Mm-hmm. But that could be, I mean, that's still probably more of a procedural thing than a policy.
Right.
And as a district, we always have the right not to accept a donation. So, you know, there are sometimes where there'll be grants that we don't go after because of the stipulations that, we know we wouldn't accept them if we got awarded the grant, type of thing. So, you know, just because something is donated to the district, doesn't mean we have to accept it.
Right.
Yes, we talked about many,
Yes.
many examples, free laptops that we never, didn't know anything about, and now we also, all of a sudden have to maintain them, things like that. It's a case-by-case issue. All right, so the last one, and I think this is the first, policy 211, vendor suspension and debarment. It was reviewed, and there are no changes to be made. But one thing that we are trying to do now, is that we, would like to add to policies when they've been reviewed, a date, so that we know that at least it was looked at this date and time, and there was no changes. So we are gonna be adding a date reviewed to all the policies as they are reviewed if there was no changes made. So it keeps us on a regular rotation. Any questions or comments on that? Great.
All right, thank you. And those will all be on the next agenda for discussion and possible approval then. Future board meeting agenda events, Tim already went through that. I'm not going to go through it again. But again, just a reminder, next meeting, January 9th, begins at 6:15 at the high school.
Yep, with the tour.
Okay. And with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
From Joe, a second.
Second.
Deb? Okay. Any discussion? No? Nobody wants to stay longer? Okay. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.
High school government students, you picked the right meeting.
Yeah.